Hey, I'm Scott.
And I'm Chris.
And this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Doxalogic. And Scott, we are going to just jump right in today because we have an ongoing conversation from the first episode about work, and we set the biblical and theological grounding. And of course, could there be more to be said? Yes, there's more to be said, but we hope we did an adequate job setting our listeners up for this much more practical conversation around questions that we've either gotten or just they float out there in the minds of Christians around how to approach their jobs, right? And so I'm just going to jump right in and help ask you to get us going. I'll ask the first question. Some people want to know, how do I discern the kind of work I should be doing, whether a kind of job or a career? How do I discern that in my life?
Yeah, I would think probably good to do a little like inventory on that. Questions that you're asking yourself, probably regarding, revolving around your personality, for example. Like, who are you? Do you prefer time alone? Do you love talking with people, right? Questions about, some people are, here's an example, right? You hear about like, man, I cannot just be sitting, I can't do a desk job all day. Right? You just have the sense of that's not me. That's not the framework for which I sense the Lord's wired me, right? There's that kind of idea. But then there's the idea, too, not just of the personality side, but the skill set side, right? There are certain things that you've been given, and through whether it's, in the classroom, whether it's in jobs you've had, whether it's in the church, you get affirmed in a certain direction, right? Man, you're good at this, or man, this is really helpful, or you kind of get the sense that this thing stands out or is a stronger gifting, and maybe more on the side of natural talent to begin with, right? The idea of this is something you're better at.
And God's wired this into you. It's both a skill, but probably also a bent you have, right? Like you find, hopefully, satisfaction in something you tend to do well. And pay attention. Also, I would just add this: pay attention to what you don't do well, and be humble enough to recognize it.
I was going to say, there's a humility in that.
There's a humility in recognizing it. Now, are there things that you may not do well today that you can grow into? Yes. But there are limits God has given each of us to say, I didn't deposit that into you. You are not, I was never on the path to be a work with my hands, fix it guy. I have learned to be adequate around the home, but not going to go out and make my living doing that. And now there's still a broad scope of opportunity, but that was very obvious to me. It's just one example. Like, skills you don't have help you understand where probably not to focus your energy on compared to things that you do.
I think of another one, which is not as common today, but just the family you grew up in. So different vocations connected. That was a much, much bigger deal in earlier times. Yeah. Right? Now there's so much more diversity in that, likely connected to just the education, mobility, various options and stuff, that it's no longer this idea that some of it was just answered for you. Who are you the son of?
Yep.
Great. You're taking that over, right? And that's not necessarily, we shouldn't get rid of that altogether, even though largely we're not as oriented that way as we were before. I think there's still something
That's a good word.
Yeah, just how you grew up and under your parents, and what was your father doing, and is that honoring work, and does that make sense to continue in that? There's already a built-in expertise because you're around it, right?
Yeah.
It's just embedded into your life. So I think that's another piece of it, but the more probably common piece for us today is, what'd you do in college? What was your major? Although the irony of that, of course, is what? Like the major you get connects to your job with like 12% of people.
It's depressing.
It's like
is
so
just
low.
depressing.
It's just like, get the degree and then you figure out what you're going to do later, right? But anyway, so
you think of certain opportunities, right, in certain regions of our country, or in certain even regions, it's a very big word, in certain cities, in certain areas where it might be a certain industry that there's a lot of opportunity in. And yeah, we have so much more mobility than we ever used to. But this is just, again, we're trying to approach this from numerous ways. The first question being, how do I discern the kind of work I should be doing? We're talking about personality. What has God made you like? whether we want to talk introvert, extrovert, people person, versus like you do love working alone. You do love being able to be more independent. What are your skill sets? Where's some education background? What are the opportunities? What's the family that you're growing up in and around? What about initiative, entrepreneurship, and leadership, right? Some of that is learned. Much of that is innate. And you see it pretty early in a lot of children, where you see their drive to do something new, to lead something, to lead others. Are you a self-starter? Which, by the way, to some degree, we should all become self-starters, where we can have some level of initiative. But entrepreneurship, for example, starting a new endeavor, is not for everyone. But man, if you're wired that way, you need to be thinking through, what are the opportunities I could create for others? Because do people tend to rally around you? Can you communicate vision in a way that, and I'm not just talking, church leadership vision. I just mean vision for a new enterprise that you're going to maybe, invest your life in. Are you someone who loves to create, to build, to be artistic? When maybe that's musical. There are so many avenues that you need to be thinking through to answer this question.
And sometimes you get to things where you decide maybe one's a hobby instead of a vocation.
Yeah.
And that's okay as well. That's part of the, I think, process of sifting through that. And maybe just, again, to kind of frame this, you should be praying about it. You should be seeking the Lord about these things, and you should be asking for good counsel with people you trust that just can kind of speak into that, especially as you're sensing a leading in a direction to pursue a certain vocation. And sometimes certain vocations, there's a lot to get to where you want to go. And so you can't really take a U-turn 3 years in, right? You've really got yourself up a creek, And so, the ability to just count the cost, get assessment from good counsel, to submit all this before the Lord, and then in whatever you're doing, seek to do it by faith.
Yeah.
See, there's, like you said, not everyone's an entrepreneur, but I think in this endeavor, there's a risk-filled faith element that's just embedded into this figuring out what, and some people treat it like, there's the one thing I'm supposed to do, like, marrying the one. There's the one thing I'm supposed to do. I just think less of that thinking and more just trusting the providence of God and how he's orchestrated and has put some things in front of you and revealed some of the questions and thoughts that we've shared.
Yeah, I would say one last comment, and we'll go on to the next question, of just the idea of the whole grass is greener on the other side complex. We tend to end up kind of fantasizing, if I could use that word, to make something else out to be idealistic. If only I could do that or become that. And there's a sense to that, but to going back to the first episode, to see where you are as where God has placed you, which is not the same thing as saying, and you can't aspire for more or greater or different. But as you do that, watch out for your heart not growing discontent with what God maybe hasn't given you yet, may not ever give you. And so it's this tension, maybe balance is the better word, of just saying you need to be both contented with what God's given you, even as you may be seeking for something else or more. And that's a challenge, no doubt, easier said than done. But as you pray, as you seek wise counsel, recognize, where am I now? This is what God has me to do. So may I do it for all my, with all my might for his glory, even as I'm trying to discern maybe a more long-term career opportunity. Another question that comes up in some sense, I'll say it one way, others might have another way of saying it. Is it okay as a Christian to have some of my sense of significance come from my work? One reason I'm asking it this way is that many people would say the moment you do that, you've made work an idol. And we're going to get into work as idolatry in a little bit, but just to say, can I take a sense of significance from my work, or must I shun that in some kind of holy endeavor to only have that come from God?
Yes, and I think the whole, if you like something, it's probably an idol, probably needs to get calmed down a little bit. I think that can get overly hyped. And I think there's absolutely significance that you can take from your work. In fact, I think you should take significance from your work, because I think it's an expression of instilled purpose in what you do.
Yeah.
And connecting it again to the greater thing of what God's doing through you. So I think that's really important. That's different than your whole world comes apart if you're not the doctor, the dentist, the entrepreneur, the pastor, or whatever. If your life falls apart because that identity is no longer attached to who you are and you're like, I don't know myself anymore. Okay, I get that. But the idea that, oh my goodness, I'm so enjoying this. Like, is that bad? I'm so loving the benefit of what I get to do as a real estate, a broker or a dentist or whatever. Like I love it so much. I love that I get to do it. I love that my work is what it is. Like I think that's a sense of satisfaction is a good thing, and I don't think we should be afraid of that. I also just don't think you should have this kind of faux humility where even as you're thanked or appreciated, you're like, it's all God, it's all God. We've talked about this before. Like it's all God. It's like the ability to know that you can say both at the same time. Like, thank you, I appreciate that because God ultimately did the work through you, right? God didn't pull your tooth. That guy did.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And he did it well, and he did it with a great manner, and he was, all these things. So I think that distinction's important to say thank you. And man, that does encourage my soul that I get to be involved in that. And I think God wants us to benefit from that in a certain way. And that's different than saying work is an idol, whereby I can't live outside of the having of this job as part of who I am.
Yeah. Well, that's well said, and maybe just brings us into the next question. When does work become idolatrous, right? So if we want to say there is a legitimate way for a mature believer to take some significance in a job well done, in a role they're fulfilling well, they are not always satisfied in it, right? Because work is hard, and there's tedious and there's futility, but there's also a good degree of satisfaction when we are working well under the Lord. But what is that line, Scott? When should we self-assess, be aware that there could be kind of an idolatrous connection to our work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to be mindful of, but a lot of times we attach it to maybe things that it's not an equal sign. So in other words, you're working really long hours, work must be an idol for you,
sure.
Right? That's not necessarily true. And I think we got to stay away from something like that. Or, man, you seem to care a lot about what you do. Again, not necessarily an idol just because of that. So, but I think a lot of times Christians with this idol of the heart idea just go, oh, maybe I shouldn't care as much. So I think it's important that when we talk about idolatry, we're talking about, is this occupying the place of God in my life? Essentially, the preeminence, right? Is this the, is it first in my life, right? If you think about, Exodus 20 and the 10 Commandments, you have that guiding sense of the first commandment: you shall have no other gods before me. Okay, so how does that flesh out in someone's life? If it's first and best and most in your life, yeah, I think that's a concern for sure. But there's ways to kind of break that down so that you see the difference between finding fulfillment in work and being satisfied in what you do. And I've become obsessed to such a degree, and here's a good sense with idolatry: is it causing me to disobey God's word in other ways because of the way that I assume
to keep
the work and do the work, right? Is it compromising other things that God says I should do? That's a great way to see idolatry, right? You may be killing it over here, but to the significant detriment of other responsibilities or ways that you're supposed to be obedient, that you aren't being obedient because this has such a preoccupation in your heart. And that's what idolatry is, right? Ultimately, it's this kind of inflation of something that becomes kind of like a God thing and leads to the disobedience of God's word in other ways.
Yeah. Just as an example to say, man, it can be difficult to discern, and we ought not to just say because of this that's it's idolatry, right? Because it's long hours. Because they're clearly committed to it, because they make certain sacrifices, it has to be idolatry. Two people could serve in a similar position, think large company, think primary leadership, what they call the C-suite, right? The chief executive officer, the operating officer, the technology officer, right? There's so many C-suite positions, and think of like two people in a C-suite position basically on a board, and they're on the highest level in a large company. One person is free. They're both Christians. One person is living free in Christ to do their best. They work very similar hours, right? One person is successfully avoiding idolatry. The other person is wrapped up in it. And I would say this. One of the hallmarks is, if I lose X, I am nothing. Right? If I lose this, I lose my value in life. Versus if I lose this, big C-suite level, I'm just making it up. If I lose this, I'll be disappointed. I'll be sad. I don't want that to happen. But that's not idolatry necessarily. It's that it's over. Everything that is attached to the meaning of my life, not just I get some significance because God's blessing my efforts and people appreciate my good work, but I am nothing without this. I would say that's hard to discern because, again, number of hours, position you hold is not the equal sign to idolatry.
Yeah.
It's very much a matter of the heart before it's just quantifiable, I think is important to say.
For sure. Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
if you get more joy out of that than you get out of, the worship of the Lord, the Lord's Day, or what, different things that should rank higher, those are good signs as well,
Yeah.
But that just came off of maybe mainly your thought that you shared.
Yeah. Well, we referenced this a little bit toward the tail end of our first episode. Like, not all work has to be a job. When I say a job, I mean
like paid,
taxable income, paid job. What about work that isn't a job? I would say specifically the work of a stay-at-home mom.
So honorable.
So honorable. Let's talk about, it doesn't only have to be that example, but that is a primary one, very relevant for many people, and it should be for mothers who are able to stay home. They may work part-time, whether in or out of the home, but their orientation is toward the home. Like, how do we still say, like everything that we've been talking about, Scott, is applicable to work that may not produce an income?
Right. You cannot keep this idea of vocation only in the category of I work to make an income. Really, actually, you could defend it even in the way of saying there is an embedded currency even in a stay-at-home mom, for example, right? There's benefit that's gained by the work that's done for the family. And so, but bottom line is that I wouldn't see that as any less significant. In fact, if anything, especially with motherhood, like you said, I think our goal should be to elevate that more. We don't see the role of mother high enough, in my opinion. And I think we need to continue to elevate it into the proper place that God has for that very significant role. But if you're a stay-at-home mom, there are challenges to that, right? Voices in our culture that say certain things, or voices inside of you that says either you're not enough or you should be doing something else to justify staying at home almost, right? Like, I've heard people say, like, oh, I went and got that extra degree so that I could justify staying home with my kids because I'm really this, but for this season I can do this because I have this going on, sort of thing, versus just seeing in the work itself this high calling, this honorable vocation, this God glorifying role, etc. So stuff like that's challenging and needs to be worked through, I think, to think about it correctly.
Yeah, and this is not going to be the time where we're able to address this in too much detail, but I think we would be amiss if we didn't include the category of stay-at-home mom, and I think there's other possible categories, whether that's, well, we're going to talk about retirement in just a little bit, where you're like, there is still work for you to do, and you should feel, not just feel, but you should know and feel that there is a sense of grand purpose and calling from the Lord into this work. You want to talk about Ephesians 2 again, and one of the good works God has given to so many, it is that stay-at-home mom. And even, gosh, we're not going to be able to right here, right now, change that terminology, but why do we have to call it that, right? Stay-at-home mom. It just even like rings, It rings as that's what you do, you stay at home. And if only we could just hear the laughter from stay-at-home moms listening to this right now, as if they're staying at home.
We need
all the
that.
time.
We need a stay-at-home mom's laugh track. Bring back
exactly.
the 90s.
The laugh track of that is just
that is so far from what's happening.
Oh, it's
So
unbelievably inaccurate. And yet I just went there and literally, Scott, until this moment in the recording did I even think about the phrase itself and what it implies. And maybe somebody can work out a better phrase to say, oh, this is the basically kind of mother I am. This is the work God's given me. And we know there are women, whether it's part-time, whether it's full-time, sometimes a sense of leading of God, sometimes just financial necessity, or maybe even, both, but they're working. And this is not meant to demean, of course, let's not go to the opposite error, right? Where we pay no attention to stay-at-home moms, but then we make those who do need to be working outside the home feel themselves less than, right? And so this is fraught with very personal and emotional territory, and so we're gonna just say, hey, this is not about one is ideal, but we know that we don't live in an ideal world, right? And it's not only in California, but we do want to say a homeward orientation for a mother is, as your primary responsibility, is very, very important. Mm-hmm. And so if your work is stay at home mom, or if your work is remuneration and you're getting paid, know that your work, your heart needs to be oriented toward the home, and this is what God has given you. And it's a long season, but Scott, the long season meaning raising kids, the longer I'm in it, my oldest is almost 12, I believe the people that told me the first time, when Colton was born, like, hey man, it's going to go by so fast. What do they say? The days are long, but the years are short. That's a proverb, right? The days are long, but the years are short. I get it now. Mm-hmm. And so embrace it, love it, and don't let, whether it's internal or external voices, take you away from, this is God's calling in my life, and I will rejoice in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking just off the stay-at-home moms idea, that phrase. It's interesting that just comes up within our thoughts, and it feels so Industrial Revolution to me.
Right.
In the sense that, why were they going, all of a sudden they're going out of the home for work? Like, that just wasn't a thing, right? Until largely the Industrial Revolution, that you'd even leave the home for work. Majority of people were working from the home, that their place of work and sustenance was coming from what they were cultivating, for example. And so, anyway.
And they would work as a family.
And they would work as a family together.
And children will be young. Children will be working young. Exactly. And we're not talking about the worst versions of it. We're talking about healthy families with working, industrious kids and adults together. Right. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into another kind of area, right? Retirement, Scott, and thinking about Christians with a mature and biblical perspective on their latter years. Let's set aside those able to retire in their 30s and 40s. Let's talk traditional. Traditional, you're retiring in your 60s. How should we think about retirement in the climate that we are in culturally in America in this 21st century?
I think of working so I don't have to work as a mentality probably needs to be reconsidered.
Sure.
Okay. It doesn't mean that you can't retire from a job and move into something that's different, right? But the idea, if the end goal is that I don't work, I think what you actually find in that is that it's violating the way God's designed things, back to episode 1, correct? And you end up finding that you lose a lot more than you think you think you're gaining.
Right.
But I think there's actually quite a bit that you're losing. Now, it doesn't mean, again, that you don't leave a job that you maybe had as a career for 30 years, but to go from that to nothing but recreation, nothing but self-serving things.
The loss of purpose is profound.
100%. 100%. I think so.
And by the way, by design.
Right.
That loss of purpose is like, oh, he's lost. That was his whole identity. Okay, maybe we're dealing with an idolatrous reality, but maybe we're actually dealing with, no, you're living with no purpose in your life now, and your soul feels it. And that's in a appropriate as far as God's design.
Yeah. So I think you're moving directions, perhaps, like out of a career and into something else. But I think to cut off work and see that as the end goal,
Right.
to see that as that's the American life, to work so I don't have to work in the future, I think you rethink that and go, no, work is not only honoring to the Lord, but it's good for us as people. We're designed in that way. So I may shift to something else that I'm working in, but man, I need to continue to do what the Lord has wired us to do, namely to continue to work. So I think that just the typical retirement emphasis needs to be questioned, not only questioned, but we got to kind of end that. The sort of, buy the yacht, sit on the beach, do nothing besides comfort and ease and all those things. It's just, it's soul shriveling.
Right. And the irony is so few people actually get literally to what you just said.
Right.
But they will aspire to it.
Well, that ends up being the goal they want.
And then the discontent sets in, and then the bodily, the breakdown of one's body as you age, and the way that there is so much resentment at times, sometimes to the Lord, of what He has not given you in those latter years. And so we're basically saying this, viewing retirement as a different form of productive living for the Lord. And so does life slow down? Does pace slow down? Yes, sure. This is, again, a transition to a different productive life, bearing fruit for the Lord in your vocation. And if you transition out of a paid vocation, that's fine, but don't transition out of productivity for the Lord. And that's just, again, like each person needs to assess when they're able to do that, why they're doing that, what they're going to seek to do to be productive for the Lord beyond just the years where you were in said career, or and maybe you were in multiple careers, all of that. But just to say, you do not view retirement as just that utopian vision that oftentimes is held out on the, I'm thinking about the investment commercials and the way they treat retirement. We have to watch out for, no, I'm transitioning hard work in this vocation to now hard work. It'll change as I might slow down and different change of pace of life. I might have grandkids, but how can I serve the Lord in that season?
I like the idea too of you saying the pace can often shift. Work as unto the Lord shouldn't. Pace often does, and that can be a really good thing to slow down in some ways, right? But not to the disconnect of work in general. So I think it's always a movement towards, where am I honoring the Lord with what He's given me next?
Yeah, very good. Well, let's do one more here. Scott, oftentimes what comes up, this book called Full Time, the last chapter of this book is by David Bahnsen, is all about work-life balance. And I got to tell you, it was a contrarian take, but it had me compelled. What role should work-life balance play into my decision about the work that I do? And so there's a number of comments here. Again, credit where it's due. I really appreciated it personally, where he essentially lays out like this work-life balance mantra is very much a modern invention. Modern meaning really the last probably 50 or so years. I was looking up some of the origins of it. It's at least 50 or so years old, but it's really taken on a pretty predominant forward-facing, companies will look for people by promoting their work-life balance. So how should we think about that? Is there a better paradigm to think about work-life balance than the traditional way we evaluate it today?
Well, I think it can accidentally, or what would you say? Maybe accidentally is the word I'm going to use. Kind of take the place of the biblical rhythms of life. Even the pattern you see in Genesis, the work rest dynamic, right? 6 days of work, 1 day of rest is unto the Lord. And seeing that framework almost go out the door for the new framework of, work-life balance. And there's good in the work-life balance situation. I'm curious to hear more about what you're seeing out of the book, but I think it can start to supplant the biblical patterns. And that's probably more my concern with it. So
Well, one of the most obvious takeaways for me as I was reading this and just meditating on this, interacting with this, is when we say work-life balance, we are pitting two things against each other in work and in our lives that God does not pit against each other. So we're treating work as intrusive to my life. Is there a place where that could be intrusive? Yes. But what I would like to propose to people, yes, is more of a work-rest paradigm, but I don't think the issue is so much balance. I think the issue is actually self-control and self-discipline, where we have many people that allow and I speak as one who has been and can still be guilty of this, where I am unnecessarily letting the work, my mental space, my checking of a message or an email at a time of evening when nothing is telling me I have to do this. I am undisciplined in some moments rather than taking work hard and rest with gratitude to God daily and weekly and even in your vacations, right? Work-life balance takes this life on its own, but it pits two things. It can pit two things against each other that aren't actually against each other in God's design. It's rather to say the rhythms, to your point, the rhythms that God has woven into the fabric of our lives, both a work and a rest, are the better way to think about it. But the paradigm in the world of work-life balance is so often utopian. We will help you achieve a work-life balance that is kind of, I don't know, it floats out there as if it's going to be perfect. It's going to solve all the tension points. But why are the tension points there? Because of the curse.
Yeah.
So the futility and frustration and exhaustion and, bang your head on the wall, you're not making progress. Like, that's not just work-life balance that'll solve that. That's actually now a part of our created reality under the curse.
Yeah, I was thinking it kind of makes work into a purely utilitarian idea where you separate it from your life, right? Work's that thing I have to do so that I can have a life.
Right.
So that I can do the things I want to do. And my life is really this. And I have work and I stick it in a shelf. And yeah, I have to do it quite a bit of my day, but I only do it in that moment and that's it. And then that's only for the purpose of doing the rest of my life kind of idea. Instead of that's not the way the Lord wants us to see it. Far more, as we've talked about, embedded together, that work is a part of a God-glorifying, God-honoring life. And so... and I like the idea of what you're saying of the onus is on us to exercise self-control to create the kind of stopgaps that basically show that while work is integral to what we do in a day, it's, in terms of your actual vocation, ultimately Jesus is Lord. And so there's an exercising of, okay, transition to the next thing the Lord's called me to do. And all of this that the Lord's called me to do in a given day is all embedded together, not separated out. And especially, I think that's the issue we've been talking about, is that work ends up getting separated out as that thing I do so that the rest of my life can happen the way I want it to happen.
Yeah. Well, listener, we do hope that going through some of these questions, I imagine there probably could be more. And by the way, you'd be welcome as we get ready to transition Doxalogic toward a new name and sort of a new style. If you've got questions around work, around career, around we could talk balance and rhythms and rest. We'd be glad to hear more specific questions. You can go to the show notes and you can find the link to ask questions there. You can also follow us on Doxalogic Podcast. That's the handle at Instagram. You can send a DM message to us. We love engaging with your questions, and we'd encourage you to leave a review, but also to leave questions either through the form that you can access or through at Doxalogic Podcast on Instagram. We are going to be engaging more and more with those in thoughtful ways, and so we hope that this has been an encouragement to you as you think through how to honor God in the work that you do, whether that's in a paid vocation, whether that's in retirement years, whether that's as a stay-at-home mom, which again, Scott, we haven't figured out the better phrase, but whatever it would be, that you would be working as unto the Lord for his glory. Hope that we've helped you and refreshed you in seeing this in some new ways. And so we look forward to seeing you next time.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.